Producing books, consumption of books, we are finally on a session that is most crucial to Jaipur Bookmark this year because of our focus on translations. This world is a beautiful place with books, it's a paradise. And with translations, we have a very soft bolster in this paradise. So, ladies and gentlemen, I present you a very, very interesting panel that has traveled from across the globe to present their story and journeys with translations in various languages worldwide. To begin with, I have Alexandra Buchler, who is the Director of Literature Across Frontiers, the European platform for literary exchange, translation, and policy debate. She is the editor of New Voices, and among the authors she has translated into Czech are J.M. Koidze and Janis Galloway. Her latest work is the English translation of Czech modern classic, The House of a Thousand Floors by Jan Buis. Please excuse if I am not pronouncing any of your authors' names correctly. I'm sorry. Next to Alexandra is Alice Grundy. Ms. Grundy is the managing editor at Giramondo Publishing, an independent literary publisher of fiction, non-fiction, and poetry. Through Giramondo's list, Grundy has an ongoing focus on literature in translation, particularly from India, China, and Mexico. She is the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Flisar, an online literary platform focused on developing young writers and editors. Welcome. I have next to Alice sitting Marit Borkenhagen, who is the festival director of the Norwegian Festival of Literature, the beautiful festival that I had the honor of attending in 2015. It's the largest literature festival of its kind in the Nordic region. It focuses on Nordic contemporary literature and has also featured international writers such as Svetlana, Margaret Atwood, and Herta Müller. Welcome. I have sitting next to Margit, somebody we were looking for since morning and were missing at Jaipur Bookmark, is Barbara Cassin. Barbara is the Director of Research at the CNRS and previously served as Director of Leon Robbins Center for Research on Ancient Thought and has been the President of the Administrative Board of the Collège International de Philosophie. She is also a translator, the editor with Elaine Badeau and L'Ordre Philosophique and Overtures. Her work has been translated in some 20 languages. In 2012, the Académie Française honored her work with the Grand Prix de Philosophie. She is, I would be very embarrassed if I pronounce this right. Looks like a very honorable position. She is Chevalier de la Légion d'Honneur. That's fine. Thank you. Thank you so much. You saved the day. And a very important gentleman in this power-packed panel filled with ladies in translation across the globe is Mr. Evald Flisar. Flisar. Mr. Evald Flisar, who is the most widely translated Slovenian author and playwright with 143 translations in 36 languages. He was the president of the Slovene Writers Association for 3 consecutive terms between 1995 and 2002 and is currently editor-in-chief of the literary and cultural magazine Sodobnost, as well as the president of the Slovene Pen Center. To begin this conversation, I'd first like to go to Alexandra and ask you about your experiences of how stories and narratives from your part of the world have traveled all around, not only in the neighborhood, but also in the demographics, in the readership terrains, which you never imagined. How have these stories excited you over ages, or what are the new frontiers that you're even going to explore?
That's a big question. I will answer it not really from the perspective of, I hope this is working. I really don't like these mics. I prefer the handheld ones. But anyway, I will answer it from the perspective of someone who runs an organization rather than from the perspective of a reader and translator. First of all, I think not enough stories travel, and this is really what we're trying to address as an organization. I always say the Literature Across Frontiers and the whole subtitle, European Platform for Literary Exchange, etc., is, it's a very long name, but it really encapsulates what we're trying to do. We work at different levels. We work with a range of people who are involved in literature, in the publication of books, in translation. And I would say that this panel really represents them. We work with authors, we work with translators, and with academics who deal with translation. We work with festivals, we work with publishers. And what we're trying to do is foster intercultural dialogue through literature and translation. And we also really try to highlight lesser-known literatures of Europe. And this is really one of our key missions, that Europe is a wonderful continent of many languages, many different literatures, many cultures, but they're not well known. Many of them are not well known. And so we're trying to promote the lesser known writers, translators. We also work a lot with emerging writers. So when I speak to, for instance, festivals, we work with a range of festivals across Europe and also here in India. And sometimes I'm told, can you bring us big names? No, we can't. and it's actually, somebody told me recently, you're the only organization that always brings authors who are interesting, but who I had never heard of. And I don't know whether to take it as a compliment. I would like to take it as a compliment. But I think it's really important to keep discovering new territories, to keep discovering new names. And so that's what we're trying to do. We have been working with India for quite a long time. The very first project we did here was a translation workshop with authors who are also translators. And it took place in a similar environment in the Nimrana Fort Hotel. And that was a wonderful introduction to Rajasthan. And then the outcomes of that workshop were actually brought to the Jaipur festival. So this was really the very first project we did here, and it was the start of a really wonderful collaboration with festivals, with publishers, with authors, and with translators. We since then conducted a number of translation workshops. We have presented authors in different festivals, and we have also worked with publishers. I have given workshops and seminars at various book fairs, for example, and also at the Publishing Next conference in Goa, which is a wonderful professional development event. And what I talk to publishers about is publishing translations and how to go about that. And there will be a session after this, which will compete with networking drinks, unfortunately, where I will also present some of the resources for publishers. It probably didn't answer your question, but
we're going to get through that in the session. Yeah. And we were talking about translation and discoverability, and there is light. So from the question of getting big authors on board or to encourage discoverability, I mean, these are the two ends of two various different separated ends of the same boat, you know. Mm. And we all are trying really hard to not only understand that this world has to see more stories coming out and being shared, but also appreciated. So in that case, I'd like to go to you, sir. You have been so widely translated. How has your experience been with translators, publishers of so many languages?
Is this working? Can you hear me? Yes. I'm an odd man out here in more ways than one. I'm not here to defend the rights of man to be in the literary world, but neither am I a translator, actually. I am more often a victim of translators. But as they say, tradutori traditori, translators are traitors. That can be a term of praise or indeed abuse. And I have encountered both. Let me give you an example of very funny translation. In the early 90s, when I returned from London to Slovenia, I watched an interview on television with an American economist. So the question at the end of the interview was, how is it that you are better known in Europe than in America? And the gentleman said, well, you know how it is, nemo profeta in patria. And I read the subtitles, and what do I read? Well, you know how it is. Nobody makes a profit in his own country. That obviously is an example of very bad mistranslation. Alexandra will understand my next example. A very nice young translator from Prague translated one of my novels into Czech. And then he visited me in Ljubljana, which is where I live. And we went through his translation. Many people think that it is easy to translate from between languages that are somehow similar. Czech and Slovenian are both Slavic languages. But that is, of course, far from the truth. As we go through the text, I notice a word, župan. And I get very angry. I said, what is župan in Slovenian means mayor. Mayor of the city, mayor of Rajasthan. No, sorry, Jaipur, whatever. And I say that there is no mayor in my novel. Where did it come from? And he says, yes, but župan in Czech means bathrobe, not mayor. I am also a translator, I will admit that. I translate my plays into English, and some Slovenians who speak very good English accuse me that translations are very bad. So I ask them why. Yes, because in Slovene your characters say one thing, and in your English translation they say something completely different. And I have to be very patient, and then I try to explain that the English in a certain situation will use completely different phrases than Slovenes. Therefore, tradutori, traditori, obviously is a very good thing. And the worst thing I can think of is a literal translation. But of course, I am not in a position to check translations into Arabic or Japanese or Bengali. So what happens there, I just have to trust the people. I think and this is what I have to say about it. Thank you.
I wish all the authors could check their translations, but the linguistic divide would always remain. So at this point, I'd like to go to you, Marit. When I attended the literature festival that you had, I was stunned by the session in which the authors were making a pitch about their books in fiction and non-fiction category. I thought it was, I had never seen it before happening. It just evokes such immense response, positive response from the audience that had literary agents, publishers lined up to talk to the authors and understand how they could place their book into their language markets. So how did this idea come about, and how do you look forward to nurture it?
Yes, the festival is the largest literature festival in the Nordic countries, and it is a very important meeting place for writers and readers, editors, translators, critics. Yes, so this is the main meeting point for literature in Norway every year. And the festival has been running for 20 years, and we have had a very good collaboration with NORLA, Norwegian Literature Abroad. And every year they invite translators and editors from abroad to Lillehammer. And so that the festival is a very good arena to present Norwegian writers for these publishers and translators. So they can meet them in such seminars like this, and they can see them in the festival. And I think that is a very good inspiration to bring them out in other languages and to the other countries. So that is a very good effect of the festival, and I'm so happy for that collaboration. Yes.
So apart from identifying the best of Norwegian writings, and I just there was one more session about best of 30 under 30, I think.
Yes.
Yes, best 30 under
Yes.
30, best of Norwegians. Could you speak a bit about it?
Yes, this year we had a collaboration with a Norwegian newspaper, Morgenbladet, and we put down a jury to read Norwegian writers below 35 years, and they were going to pick out the 10 best. Yes. So they had to read a lot, of course, because it was fiction, non-fiction, children's literature. It could be everything. And they worked for this for some months, and they ended up with a list with very good Norwegian writers. And then we have this, the 10 best below 35. And I think that it was a good thing for the Norwegian readers. And then they could, oh, I have to read that writer and that writer. I have not read it before, and I think it was it's a good opportunity for the writers, and I can see that after the festival, it's quite often I see that they are in an interview in the newspaper and that on, they are mentioned as one of the 10 best. So it's very good for marketing, of course, and I think that some of them are going to be picked up by publishing houses abroad.
Amazing,
so, yes.
Amazing. I think it just solves so much if you have one language in a country. Because if we were to choose in India, best 30 under 30, I think nobody would be able to come out with that list. So at this point...
Yes. But we have two written languages in Norway. But so it was writers from both of the languages on the list. But what is good for us is that everybody can understand both written languages in Norway. Yes.
Okay, great. Coming to you, Barbara, how do you see the whole scenario of global translation transforming the terrains of discoverability and readership of new genres, new voices, and new authors?
Well, I think that the point with translation, I don't know what I think of the global translation. What I know is that roads of translations have always been roads of power. since the Middle Ages, you know, it constitutes the different roads of sciences were roads of languages and cultures, but roads of appropriation, roads of transformation, invention, roads of power and of trade. There are roads of translation as they were roads of silk. Well, now there is roads of translation. It's very simple. The more a country is an empire, the less he has to translate himself. Things are translated into Globish, into global English. And what I've tried to do is to consider the fact that language of Europe, I am European, I'm French, I am European. Language of Europe is translation. It's a, you know, it's a sentence of, I quote here Umberto Eco, but I think that language of India is also translation, and how much more even. And if we want to escape the pure Globish, without falling down into another trap, which is something what I call ontological nationalism, if you want, or linguistic nationalism, you have to translate. This is the best way to escape the two dangers. And in itself, translation is something very important, politically important, I think, because it learns to know how with differences. And that's what I've tried to make with some, well, let me say, 150 people, philosophers, I'm a philosopher, making a dictionary of untranslatable terms that are symptoms of difficulty, symptoms of discrepancies between languages, between sets of words. And this dictionary has been translated. First thing, it means that in philosophy, just as in literature or in poetry, we are speaking. We are not speaking by concepts. We are speaking by words. We are philosophizing in tongues, if you want. Just as the Bible says, speak in tongues. Well, we philosophize in tongues, not only in concept, in languages. And these languages are not the same. And what is interesting is to try to perceive what are the differences. Why, when you say mind, you don't say exactly esprit, or you don't say exactly Geist, for example, but I suppose it's the same, you know, in the different languages of India. And, well, when you begin to think like that, it opens new possibilities first, and then I think it's a very good cultural and educational trend, because really these, excuse me, I'm a philosopher, I use terrible words. It essentialize things, you know, you stay in between, and you can really compare and shift. And this is a very good introduction to what could be politics, I think. So our dictionary is translated, that's to say appropriated, in 10 or more languages. And each language, each culture, each country is wanting something else, you know. For example, when it has been translated in Princeton in English, the English people, the American people, wanted to defend English against Globish. That's to say also defend a little bit kind of philosophy which is not purely analytic. Well, and etc., etc. In Brazil, they want to consider what is a post-colonial language. You know, what is linguistic anthropophagy? How did the Portuguese of Brazil is not the Portuguese of the mother country? Okay, so you see, my point is that translation is really a know-how with differences that is politically pertinent.
Very well said, ma'am. In fact, when we are translating between Indian languages, we come across certain realms of sentence formation, grammar, that were completely unknown to us before, and we suddenly get to know that, oops, Malayalam is so similar to, for example, X language in our country, but the form of that language would be, say, 50 decades old. You know, and therefore the language becomes such a living thing as a register of our ever evolving world. So I think you are absolutely correct there. And just taking that clue from you, I'd like to come to you, Alice. I'd like you to comment upon your list at your publishing house. You are working so hard, I know, for bringing as many voices in your list as possible. What are the marketing challenges do you face for selling such books? Because I understand, as all of you would agree with me, translations are very difficult to sell at times, because I think you have to educate, tell people about a different culture, a different world they have never known through that book. So how has your experience been?
Well, Giramondo, shall I try? Yeah, this is working. Giramondo is unique as far as I know in that we're housed at a university, but we're not obliged to publish any university books. And we also receive support from the Australia Council for the Arts. So this means that we have two very good sources of funding, and we're able to publish books primarily on the basis of their literary quality, and we don't have to worry quite as much about the commercial side of things. I'd like to tell you a story about one of our books, and I could tell you a story about an Indian title that we published, work in translation, that we published in July last year, but it was a very straightforwardly happy story, and it was terrifically easy. So I won't tell you that story. I'll tell you the slightly longer story, but it also has a happy ending, about a Chinese book. So and when you were talking about the roots of power, it really struck a chord with me, because in Australia, we have 1 in 4 people who were born outside of Australia, and many of these people are Indian and many of them are Chinese. But for the most part, Australians don't engage with Indian or Chinese culture except eating the food. And so for a publisher like Giramondo that has the creative freedom, we think it's very important to pursue publishing Chinese and Indian books. And because we're housed at a university, there was an excellent conference bringing Chinese writers to Australia. And my boss met a writer called Shen Keyi, whose book Northern Girls was published by Penguin China. And then he met her again in Beijing, and she said, I have a manuscript, and it can't be published here, and I'd like to give it to you. And so this was a book called Death Fugue, after the Salon poem. And she had written a book which was a sort of allegory for Tiananmen. And so that was why it couldn't be published in China, but it wasn't exclusively that. It was also that she had intentionally written a book that was very bawdy and included violence, because both of those things are also censored out of a lot of Chinese books if they're to be published in China. And fortuitously, being housed at a university also means that the university receives donations from businessmen, and we had one such man called Mr. Chu, a Chinese businessman, who said, I will give you $50,000 and I would like to promote Chinese culture in Australia. So that meant that we were then able to translate 2 books from Mandarin, and we were able to pay the translators adequately, which for the translators here, I'm sure you'll be happy to hear that. And it also meant that when it came to promotion, we did have a little bit in the way of funding. But another angle to this story is that one of her short stories was published in a collection called New Asia Now, which was edited by Jane Kamens, who's in the front row here. And as a result of that initiative, there was also some Australia Council funding, which meant that Shen Keyi came to Australia and went to the Melbourne Writers' Festival and also did events in Sydney. So as a result of this perfect storm, or I should say, perfect set of rainbows, with pots of gold at the end of each of them, it meant that we were able to publish this very important, very interesting work by a Chinese writer that is an absolute gateway into the Chinese psyche, for Australian readers. It is experimental, it is dark, it's a difficult, funny, satirical book, but that's exactly what makes it so important for us to publish it. And as a result, I mean, the sales aren't huge, but to give you an idea, we have sold more copies of her book in Australia than Moyan's The Frog sold in America. And that's something of which she is very proud.
So which means that demography and nationality, language group, they all account to a selection of books for a particular geography. So in that case, are you looking at a particular age group? I just want to know, how does the Norwegian literature travel across the globe, looking at various territories of readerships? Because Norla has a very exquisite catalog, has a very exquisite list that is pitched out to the publishers globally. And what are the bases of the selections for this list?
I think that Norwegian literature export has grown a lot the last 20 years. And it started with a writer you maybe know, Jostein Gaarder, and his Sophie's World, who was a big success, a bestseller around the world. And I think that opened the doors for Norwegian literature. So it's also always important to have one breakthrough. So after Jostein Gaarder, we have had a lot of Norwegian writers, high quality literature, who has been sold out and done well. So you have Per Petterson, you have
Knausgård.
Yeah, you have Knausgård. He's the last one, the big star. So he's in a league of his own, he and Jon Esbø, and I think that it's a lot of names, but I think that you have some good writers with success, and then it's easier to have scouts and editors to look to Norwegian literature, and it's not it's not easy to say they have something to common. They're so different ages, different genre, but it's high quality literature, a lot of them, and yeah. So we have. I think that the work that Norla does to get them out and working with translator around the world is so extreme importance. So they have organized translator conferences. They have funding for translation and for sample translation, and they have yes, different kind of things that is important, and then have done these things for many years, and for each year it grows, and you have this breakthrough with some writers of high quality, and then it's easier to have give new writers the opportunity to be read and translated and go out in the world.
That's very impressive, Marit, and I think here in India we have a lot to learn from this process. But is financial sales or financial success of a book in the domestic market a very important parameter for it to travel abroad and its chances of getting traveling abroad? And I'm sure Alexandra and Barbara will have some different notions or responses to that question. So first to you, Alexandra.
Was it, sorry,
It's financial success.
financial success?
Very important for deciding whether the book can travel, or is it something else?
I noticed that when books are promoted, especially by agents, they always mention how many copies sold in the domestic market. I'm not sure that this matters really, and I also am not sure at all that the same book can really travel everywhere. Because this would be, if it could be successful everywhere, and you can make a book successful, I suppose, with a lot of marketing and big investment. But I would like to believe that actually, that if a single book could be successful everywhere, that would be a kind of prime example of the detrimental effects of globalization. And so I think that books find their readers, and they may find their readers in different cultures, but hopefully not in all cultures. Financial success, what can I say about that? I mean, it's a completely different thing. I think that a good book often does not sell in great numbers, and that's what happens. Barbara.
Well, human sciences, it's very particular. It's not literature. And when you sell, let us say in France, 10,000 of a book, it's a marvel. I did send 10,000 of the Dictionary of Untranslatable quite quickly. And the editor couldn't believe it, because he wanted to publish 800, and then he redo. And when it has been translated in US, Princeton sold more than these 10 in 3 months. So I think that things can happen when you prepare them, and when there is a lot of full glare of publicity on the gesture. And even if it is not apparently something public, very, very popular, it could become. So I think we really have to work, if we want something really obvious, something to become obvious, it has to be a hard work project. No.
Alice, you had a very different version of the whole thing, that a Chinese businessman was generous and gave a really good packet of support for producing these beautiful books that just kind of got the Chinese readership active in Australian market. Would you like to comment on this whole scenario of selection and then marketing of translations, and what are the parameters do you usually follow for your press?
Well, I think that... Okay, you sorted. We'll see if yes, it's coming on again. I can understand why agents comment on the number of sales that a book has had in its local country, because it says something about the market, and I do think that there are some books which can appeal across cultures and across countries, and they won't necessarily appeal in exactly the same way, but they can definitely have the same appeal. There's a book that we're publishing in March this year, and I'll be sending to print 2 days after I get home, so it's sort of my 6:30 a.m. emailing is hopefully keeping it on track. But this is a book that came in through unsolicited submissions, which is a rather unusual case for us. And it was translated by a young woman doing a PhD at a university in Melbourne. And so the way that we got around the funding question on this book is that her completion of the translation was effectively funded by her PhD scholarship. But the writing is of such an extraordinarily high quality. And when I was reading it, I was thinking this writing is of such a high standard. If it had been someone simply writing their own novel, I would have been impressed, let alone a translation by a first-time translator. So this is a book which is very exciting for us in that it's Guillermo Fanelli, who's a Mexican author who's won a bunch of prizes in Mexico, but as yet hasn't been translated into English. And so we're really excited about bringing him to the West, but there are two major difficulties. One is that it's a translation, a literary translation at that, and two is, well, that he's not in the country and his English is not especially strong. So how do we get a book like that to the readership? And I think for the most part, what we do is try to tap our key influences. And as somebody mentioned before that word of mouth on a previous panel, that word of mouth is key, and it absolutely is. And in Australia, Twitter is very important for publishing, and in fact, books regularly trend on Twitter. People who are in literary circles are incredibly active.
That's a social media paradise.
Yes. So it's really a great platform for us. And we also have a very strong literary journal culture in Australia, which has been building up over the past 5 or so years. And this means that there are people who are prepared to take more risks on writing, especially people they haven't heard of, young writers, people experimenting. And so it also means that there are more literary sources for doing things like giveaways, or for people who will do an interview with an author who's maybe a little bit more left of center that the major papers won't take up. But the other thing is that because Giramondo is a small literary publisher, and because we've built up a reputation over the years, all of our books are reviewed in the major papers. And even though review space is diminishing and we don't necessarily get the degree of coverage that we would like, and because some of the newspapers are owned by the one company, you have a review reproduced in Sydney and Melbourne and Canberra. So if it's a bad one, you're in big trouble. But if it's a good one, we're fine with that. But at least because of the reputation of our publisher and the relationship that we have with reviewers and with the audience, we know that at the very least we will receive reviews for our books.
That's fantastic. You know, as someone who's had the honor of publishing Thomas Transtromer, Nutz Hamsun, and now Herta Müller and Marjan Satrapi in Hindi, I can definitely tell you how important it is to have that good review about the translation in that newspaper of your language that maybe the general readers may not be reading, but all the literary walas are reading. So I can completely agree with you. Sir, coming to you towards the end of the session, I would like to know about these receptions from the newspapers, from the readers in different geographies in which your books have traveled. How has the experience been? I'm sure your literary agent or your publisher would be sending the cuttings of the newspaper or the clippings from the news channels if the book was featured there. And how does it feel to have it all there on the table?
Can I have? Thank you. To return to financial success and writer, I think that's a contradiction in terms, at least in my case. But not necessarily so, because one of my plays was produced in Yogyakarta in Indonesia about a year and a half ago, and because the playwright is usually given 10% of the box office takings, I became a millionaire already after the 6th performance, but only in Indonesian rupees, and it's 1,600 rupees to euro. Also, the theater decided to give at least one performance on every one of Indonesian inhabited islands, of which there are 14,000. And then they had second thoughts because they worked out it would take them about 250 years to do it. The question, of course, was reception of the books. Yes. Well, I do get, of course, I can't read anything in strange languages like Amharic or, as I mentioned, Arabic and even Indonesian. And it varies from place to place. I mustn't forget to mention that the reason my plays are done in so many countries is because this is due to an evil theft perpetrated by Google Books, because when my 7 of my plays were published in United States collected plays 1, Google Books stole them, and they became available on the internet to everybody, and suddenly offers started coming in from all over the place. So I know that about 60,000 authors are suing Google Books for theft, but I thought of sending them a bunch of flowers instead, because without this, probably for someone who writes in a language spoken by, believe it or not, 2 million people, not all of them speak it well, it's very difficult to break out of, it's a sort of straitjacket. And although the state helps to some extent, translators of Slovenian novels and plays get translation grants of up to 4,500 euros, which is not bad. And we also have a special foundation that supports foreign publishers publishing Slovenian books. So a response, I can read. If I recently read a very good review of 2 of my books in the Irish Times, but I don't collect these things, you see, because I am a very disorderly sort of person, and I think writers shouldn't place too much importance on what is written about their work, because that may confuse them and demoralize them, or make them think that they are very good writers, which of course is fatal for any author. So I just leave it all to... I don't even read the reviews of my books in my own language.
That amazing amount of courage to accept. Thank you so much. It was a lovely session. I just request our audience if they have any question, any comments, suggestions. Yes.
Hello. I would like to ask Alice Grundy, how do I get in touch with you? I translate from Marathi and Hindi into English. So I would like to know how to get in touch with you.
I'll give you my card after the session.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Vivek Kaul. I've come from Calcutta. And I've got a sense of what a great honor it is to be a global villager today in meeting all of you. I really want to just do nothing but share my love and respect for all the sentiments that you expressed. It makes me feel very alive today to have just been in this session. I think this is a bit of an overreaction, but that is what I think writing does to some people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, dear panelists. Sorry. Oh, yes. Yes, here is a comment.
Before this session is over and closed, I just want to tell all of you that in 2017, the Norwegian Festival of Literature, we are going to have a focus on British and Indian literature. So if anybody of you have good advices for us, want to collaborate with the festival to bring good, interesting Indian and British writers to Lillehammer for our festival. And if you are interested in Norwegian literature, if you are a translator, a publisher, and you want to come to Lillehammer to learn more about Norwegian literature, so let me know. Maybe we can to get the literature go out in the world together. Yes.
No, I just want to express my admiration to the festival. Really, I think it's a great thing. Thank you.
And thank you to our host.